Well, hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Let's Translate Light Novels. In this series, I look at the text of the Shigeyugi prequel light novel, Seiran Den. It's a novel about Nakago's past, for any of you who actually know about the series of Shigeyugi. Anyway, I analyzed the translations of my patrons as well as my former self when I was much younger and less experienced at Japanese. For more information about the series and the translators involved, check the video description and let's jump into it. We start with a line of dialogue, sonna, followed by double ellipses. Towaku suru matuta ni mukatte, Taria no haha wa itta. So this tag that comes after sonna, on its own, it might be confusing. It might look like the tag is associated with this line of dialogue, but it is actually not. This sonna is being said by Matuta. So remember back to the last episode, Taria and Ayuru are out. It's his birthday. They went to the Lake of Blue, and then Taria's mother came over and yelled at Matuta saying, where the hell is my daughter? Where did your son take her? Etc. And so Matuta responded to that with like, oh, sonna, because her mother was like, I'm going to see to it that my daughter never plays with your son ever again. So sonna, as an exclamation like this, it's sort of like, oh no, or say it ain't so, or please no. It can be translated so many different ways. Because on its own, sonna doesn't really mean much of anything. It implies that other words are following it. Like, sonna koto iwanai de, like, please don't say that kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, translate that as in many different ways. Towaku suru. Towaku suru is to be perplexed. Mukatte, to turn to face someone. And then, Taria no haha wa ita, Taria's mother said. So, turning to face the perplexed Matuta, Taria's mother said. And then the next line that comes after this tag goes with this tag. So I know it's kind of confusing the way I isolated these two things, and this is often how it is when you're reading and translating light novels. It's often very unclear which tag belongs to who. Sometimes there aren't even tags, and you have to just kind of discern from the speech pattern who's saying what. But anyway, yeah, this tag goes with the next line that Taria's mother's going to say. So how did Patron A translate that? You can't, Matuta said in bewildered shock. So note, and a lot of tags are like this. If you analyze this tag further, the first half of the tag actually does kind of go with sonna. Towaku suru matuta. Leave out the ni mukatte and everything that comes after that. The towaku suru matuta part is kind of the tag for sonna. So that's what Patron A did. Patron A just kind of finished the thought here and ignored the rest of the ni mukatte Taria no haha wa itta, and that part was moved. I do this so much when I translate light novels professionally. I cut up tags, I move them around just to make them more clear because they're done so differently in Japanese prose. So this was a good choice from Patron A. Or Patron B. But, ... So you can't and but are actually both very valid translations of sonna. Matuta could only sputter in bewilderment as Taria's mother continued. So Patron B did actually connected the tags together. And as you can see, this does work. It's still rather clear that Matuta was the one saying but and that she's bewildered. And the sputter is not a reach because of the ellipses. If you're, like I just did right now, if you kind of go or you say a word and then you kind of pause, you're kind of sputtering or stuttering. As Taria's mother continued, note how the Patron B did not work in as Taria's mother faced Matuta, who was sputtering in bewilderment, and said, it's a lot cleaner this way. A small Sarah, so me, age 18, before I knew Japanese very well, please don't. Another valid translation of sonna. Taria's mother faced the embarrassed Matuta and said, okay, so yeah, small Sarah took a little bit more of a literal approach here with this tag, but even that kind of works. Like if you look at the way all of us handled this tag, we all handled it pretty differently. Patron A just cut off the part of the tag that involved Taria's mother, and I assume Patron A is going to move that later to another part. Patron B kept them together in order and kind of Patron B did this thing where like the first half of this tag is a tag to the line that came before it, and then the second half of the tag, as Taria's mother continued, is a tag to the next line that comes. And then small Sarah made this tag, it's sort of a pre-tag to Taria's next line. And in small Sarah's translation, there was not a paragraph break here. It immediately went into another quote. Notice how there's like a hanging comma, and said comma. Immediately after this, there was a line of dialogue. So there's 3 different ways that you can do it. All right, the next line of dialogue. Now, this is a long line of dialogue, but I'm going to keep it intact. It's a rant. So lots of words. Bear with me here. 私も今までずいぶん多めに見てきたつもりですよ. And then a long ellipses. あなたのしたことは一族の掟には反していたけど、comma. 同じ女としてわからないわけでもなかった。Another ellipses. それに、あゆるは見た目も品族と一緒だし、よくしつけも行き届いたいい子ですからね. And then long ellipses, けどね, shorter ellipses. So what these ellipses are doing, for the most part, they're just kind of showing that there are pauses in her speech. You don't have to like meticulously like add the ellipses exactly where they appeared in the Japanese prose. You can kind of play around with that, but basically this is kind of showing the emotionality and the tone with which she's saying this thing. I think she's kind of being thoughtful. She's like trying to pick her words properly. It's probably really difficult for her to say this too, and we'll look into the words and see why that is. So 私も今まで, so I too, all this time up until now, 随分, so very much, 多めに見てきたつもりですよ. So 多めに見る is to sort of like give someone the benefit of the doubt, to like turn a blind eye, sort of like, you know, to be like, yeah, to be generous about something. This tsumori, actually, if you took beginner level Japanese, you probably learned that tsumori means like that you plan to do something or that you were intending to do something. But in this case, when it's with past tense, it's more like I've tried to do this thing, or I like to think that I have done this thing. So it actually doesn't mean like and it's my intention to have done this thing. I mean, I guess it does kind of linguistically work that way. It was my intention to have like been generous with him, to have given him to have given you and Ayuru the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, it's more like I like to think that, or I've tried to give you and or Ayuru the benefit of the doubt all this time. あなたのしたことは what you did 一族の掟には反していたけど it was in opposition to, or it rebelled against the okite, so this word that's translated many different ways in all of these videos, the rule, the code of our clan. It was like contrary to the code of our clan. But けど同じ女として as a woman like you わからないわけでもなかった. So beautiful double negative here. So わからない, I did not understand. わけでもなかった. It's not the case that I didn't understand. It's not like I didn't understand. So in other words, I did understand. Because I am a woman just like you. It's like what you did, it went against the code of our clan, but I can't say that I didn't understand why you did it. As a woman, you know, since I am a woman just like you. それに, besides, あゆりは見た目も in physical appearance, like, you know, to look at him, to look at Ayuru, 品族と一緒だし, so she's giving some reasons why she was 多めに見てきた, why she gave them the benefit of the doubt. It's like, what you did was wrong, but I can kind of understand why you did it because I'm a woman just like you. And also, you know, Ayuru looks like he's hin, just like us. Like he looks just like the hinzoku. Yoku shitsuke mo iki todoita. Yoku, like very well, basically. This is like the adverb version of good. Shitsuke is like to be disciplined. Mo ikitodoita. He's like very attentive and disciplined. Okay, quick addendum from Sarah in post. Hi, me editing this video. Anyway, when I read this in Japanese and was, ingesting it in Japanese, I was correct to attach shitsuke and ikitodoita together. But when I was going through it one word at a time, I looked at the words in isolation, and that's actually not what you're supposed to do here. These two words go together. Shitsuke mo iki todoita, that means like you, Matuta, were attentive in ensuring that he was well brought up and disciplined, not Shitsuke. Ayuru has good shitsuke, he's disciplined, and iki todoita, and he's attentive. That's actually not correct. My initial instinct when I was reading it in Japanese is correct. Keep those two words together. This is why a one word at a time translation doesn't necessarily work so well. You wind up with little mistakes like that. Anyway, back to the video. Iiko, he's a good boy. Like, you've disciplined him well, he's attentive, and he looks like a hinzoku, and I understand why you did what you did, so that's why I have tried to give you the benefit of the doubt and, like, been okay with you. Kedo ne? But, you see, but that's not enough. She's going to follow it with a but. So that's what this whole rant is. And again, she's doing this with a lot of pauses. So she's, like, maybe trying to find the right words. And it's also kind of difficult for her to say this. It's like, this is a woman who's been with the clan for, the last 10 years after the mistake that she made. And yeah, like, this is probably stuff that she's been feeling, Taria's mother has been feeling for, like, the past 10 years. And she's finally saying it, and it's really difficult for her to say. All right, so Patron A translated this as, look. I love starting it with look. This is a very natural thing that English speakers would say if you're going to tell someone something difficult like this. Look, I've tolerated you for a long time now. That's a bit strong. I like to think, I don't know, tolerated does work, but it almost sounds a little too rude. But what you just did was against the code of our clan. It's not what you just did. It's what you did. And that's kind of hard to tell just from anata no shita koto wa. Yeah, I think if she meant to say what you just did, it would be anata ga ima shita koto wa or something. There might have been an ima in there if it was like what you just did. It's more what you did. And context, that thing that you did in the past was against the code of our clan, but I can understand as a fellow woman why you did so. Even so, Ayuru does look like a heen, and you've raised him well, but it's not exactly even so. Soreni in this case is more like besides. Additionally, like, she's listing the reasons why she has been nice to Matuta all this time, even though she shouldn't have been. She's like, hey, I understand why you did what you did, and Ayu's a good boy and everything, and you've raised him well. I like you've raised him well for, like, shitsuke mo iki todoita iko, like, he's disciplined and well attentive. It's like, you've raised him well, I think is a really good simplification and translation of that. Okay, so patron B. Oh, and notice also that patron A left out most of the ellipses, which is fine. Again, it's more an emotionality sort of thing. I don't know, I personally might have left some of the ellipses in, but then again, I'm pretty liberal with my ellipses. So don't listen to me. Okay, patron B. I'd like to think I've given you the benefit of the doubt up to this point. Yeah, that's a really good translation of zuibun oome ni mite kita tsumori desu yo. Like, I think I've been pretty generous with you all this time. She paused. I like that. Instead of an ellipses, stopping and adding a descriptor, like, she paused. That is super valid. I actually do that a lot in my professional light novel translations, especially if there's, like, a line of dialogue that's just ellipses. That often begs for some kind of descriptive, she stood there silently, or she only hung her head, or something. But even if it's within a line of dialogue like this, you can, like, turn an ellipses into a tag, as long as it's still accomplishing its purpose, which is, to show that she paused. So it's not a mistranslation to add this. What you did went against the rules of the clan, but as a woman myself, I can't say I didn't see the reason behind your actions. So I can't say I didn't see the reason behind your actions. Like, I still like this as a double negative, but I don't know, in this particular wording, it's a little bit confusing. Double negatives are hard in English, man. Like, usually it's best to default when you find a double negative in Japanese to just change it to a positive. Like, generally, not always. Again, I kind of like keeping it as a double negative in this case. I can't say I didn't see the reason. Maybe I can't say I didn't understand why you did it. I can't say I didn't see the reason behind your actions. I don't know. I think it just sounds a little strange to me. And more importantly, she continued, again, adding a tag in place of an ellipses to break it up a little bit more naturally. Ayuru looks like a member of our Heen clan, and he's been well-behaved and minded his manners. I like that. But there are some things, and then translating kedone as but there are some things does work later when you see how Patron B continues this line of dialogue. Yeah, this is nice. It was a little wordier than Patron A's, you may notice just by the sheer length of it. Part of that was because ellipses were changed into short dialogue tags. And I think it's fine in this case to make the speech a bit wordier, because again, she's kind of like trying to search for the words. She would be kind of talking in circles and wording things in longer ways here. It's not one of those like shouty, short argumentative statements. It's more a meandery thing. Small Sarah. Up until now, I've been keeping close watch on them. Nope, that's wrong. Oh, many mite kita. I mean, I probably, just kind of looked at the words individually and like thought oh me meant big eyes. I've looked with big eyes. But yeah, nope, keeping close watch on them is wrong. What you did was rejected by our law. Odd phrasing, but technically correct. But as a woman like you, I understood why you did what you did. I understood why you did what you did is a bit, the heart of what she's saying here. It's a little wordy still. I understood why you did. I understood why you did it, not what you did. I understood why you did what you did is kind of weird. But I understood why you did. And besides, on the surface, Ayuru looks like he belongs to the Heen race. Again, they're not a race, they're a clan. And he is a very nice boy. Very nice boy works okay. For yoku shitsuke mo iki todoita iko. I probably just didn't understand yoku shitsuke mo iki todoita and just went with iko. Yeah, I probably just skipped over that. But, it works. But, ... Okay. Yep, small Sarah got the oh many meter just wrong and cut out a little bit of her dialogue. On the surface? Oh, mitame. Yeah, small Sarah thought mitame is sort of on the surface. I mean, on the surface, you could translate it that way. But you don't really need the on the surface. And besides, Ayuru looks like he belongs to the Heen, right? You don't need the on the surface part. Anyway, next line. Matuta wa jitto aite no hitomi o mita. Matuta, okay, so jitto is like a sound effects for staring, staring hard, intently. Aite no hitomi o mita. So aite is one of those fun words to translate. It really varies depending on context. So aite is like your opponent, basically, like the person that you're up against, the other person, your partner in some cases. It's not always like an adversarial sort of thing, like kekkon no aite, like the person you're marrying. Yeah, your partner. But yeah, it's like the other person, the person that she was having the conversation with, aite. Her, Taria's mother, hitomi mita, looked into her eyes. So Patron A translated that as Matuta stared into the mother's eyes. The mother's weird, just Taria's mother's eyes. But yeah, I liked the decision of changing aite into like the mother's eyes, because that's who we're talking about. We're talking about Taria's mother here. Patron B. Matuta hung on her every word, looking deeply into her eyes. Hung on to her every word was not in the original Japanese, but if you're staring intently into her eyes, you probably are hanging on to her every word. I would not have added the hung on to her every word, but I like it. It flows really well in English, and it paints a really good picture. Yeah, like anytime you encounter any kind of sound effect in Japanese, I think you're at some liberty to add a little bit of English, since we don't use sound effects so much to describe moods and vibes and feelings. Japanese will use sound effects to describe a vibe or a mood. And in English, we tend to use more like descriptive, like phrases, rather than just a sound effect. So it definitely works. Small Sarah translated it as, Matuta was focused on her opponent's eyes. Yeah, so like, Aite, yeah, you can translate that as opponent. In my game translations, I almost always will translate Aite as opponent, because it's like, it's so-and-so versus so-and-so. If you knock out your opponent within the 10-second time limit, you get 5 experience points. So, but in this case, opponent is not the best translation of Aite. I mean, I guess Taria's mother's her opponent in this argument, but yeah, it's not a great translation for Aite in this case. I like Matuta was focused on her eyes. Yeah, just replace her opponents with on Taria's mother's eyes or something. Next line, kedone. So this is Taria's mother continuing what she was saying. So she finished with kedone, ... and now she's continuing with kedone. Tenko-sama ga oikari ni natta ijo, ... もう付き合うことはできないのよ. So, けどね, but, you see, Tenko-sama, remember that's the name of their god, who is actually a devil. Oikari ni natta. So, this ikari ni natta, this is a very, like, grand, polite way of speaking Japanese. I think, yeah, I have a video that goes into some of the, I think it's 2 videos from the Genki 2 series that go into this more, like, formal, like, I think it's called honorific Japanese. I don't know what the official textbook name of this speaking style is, but like adding an o and then a verb in its like stem form, and then ninaru or ninatta, it means like tenko-sama ga okotta ijo. You basically just replace that with the past tense version of the verb. But this makes it more honorable because she's talking about their god here. So now that Tenko has gotten angry, basically, tsukiau koto wa dekinai no yo, Taria, in parentheses, can no longer associate with your son, can no longer be friends with your son. Tsukiau, so this is a nice vague verb. Colloquially, it usually means date somebody. But really it just means like keep company with somebody, or like tag along with somebody, hang out with somebody. But yeah, so in this case, I would probably translate that as like, my Taria cannot be friends with your son anymore, or our children can't be friends anymore. All right, patron A. But Lord Tenko has gotten angry. We can't be seen with you or your son anymore. Yeah, that's fine too. In my brain just now, I interpreted mo tsukiau koto wa dekinai no yo as talking about the children, but she wasn't necessarily talking about the children can't be friends anymore. She could have been talking indeed about just like herself and her entire family, like, we can't associate with you anymore. We can't be seen with you or your son anymore also works really well. It's more like, but now that Lord Tenko has gotten angry, or but since Lord Tenko has gotten angry, that the ijo, Tenko-sama ga oikari ni natta ijo, now that Lord Tenko has gotten angry, like, that's kind of the last straw. Like, we can't be seen with you and your son anymore. So it's missing that little nuance of, but now that Lord Tenko has gotten angry. It's super nitpicky. It doesn't actually, like, take away much from the text to leave that nuance out. Patron B. So remember how Patron B left off her angry rant? Well, not angry rant, her sort of stammering, like, trying to find her words. Her breakup speech really is what this is. But there are some things, ... Matuta hung on her every word, looking deeply into her eyes. And then starting the quote again, ... Some things, like drawing the wrath of Lord Tenko, that cross the line. So, okay, yes, cross the line is a great translation of ijo in this case, coming after that verb. Oikari ni natta ijo. This ijo thing, it's like, now that this has happened, like I said earlier, like, this is the last straw. It can't go any further than this. Like, that's done too much. That's crossed the line. some things like drawing the wrath of Lord Tenko that crossed the line. Like, right now, as we're looking at this line in isolation, it might look like this was a bit of a mistranslation. Like, in the Japanese, she's like, now that Lord Tenko has gotten angry, and that has crossed the line, we can no longer associate with both of you anymore. But you'll see the way that Patron B translates, like, the rest of this dialogue exchange, it doesn't quite cut off that nuance like it looks like it does in isolation. Sometimes you do have to kind of rearrange bits of dialogue into other bits of dialogue for everything to flow better in English. Although Patron B did leave out, like, we can't associate with you anymore, which I do think is really important here. Yeah, you know, in Japanese, this is actually kind of weird. I'm just going to spoiler. I mean, you're going to find out in like a couple minutes anyway when I move on to the next line of dialogue. But basically, she finishes this line with like, もう付き合うことはできないのよ. Like, we can't associate with you anymore. And then Matuta's immediate response to this is, Tenko-sama ga oikari ni? Like, what? Tenko's mad at me? Or Tenko's mad at us? So it's kind of weird even in Japanese. It's like to respond to, we can't be your friends anymore, to what? Tenko's angry? So yeah, I mean, like, in a way, Patron B almost fixed it by removing the we can't associate with you anymore, because then it flows a little better with Matuta's response. However, yeah, even though Matuta's response was a little weird in the Japanese, I do think the motsukiau koto wa dekinai no yo part was pretty important, so that should have been left in. Small Sarah, not Patron. But he made Tenko-sama angry, so I can't let my daughter see him anymore. This is pretty straightforward. It's not wrong or anything. It doesn't seem very emotional somehow. But yeah, it's fine. I don't really have any complaints there. Yeah, Small Sarah is also missing that nuance of like, now that you've made Tenko angry, things have changed. Like now that has happened, I can't let your son see my daughter anymore. And again, it's not necessarily I can't let my daughter see your son anymore. It could just be like, we can't see you anymore. Okay, so like I spoiled earlier, the next line is Matuta, Tenko-sama ga oikari ni? ... small tsu, question mark, exclamation point. So in past videos, I've expressed that like a small tsu at the end of dialogue, especially with ellipses and stuff like that, it usually notes like a gasp or some kind of like emotional guttural sound that's not really a word. You know how the stereotypical anime like response is like that weird like double gasp that's sort of like an exhale followed by a sharp inhale? Like it's kind of like that. Anyway, so she's basically just repeating Tenko got angry. And then the tag for this line of dialogue, Miken ni shiwa o yoseta Matuta ni Taria no haha wa itta. So miken is like your eyebrows, your brow, like between your eyebrows. Shiwa o yoseta, so like wrinkles formed together between her eyebrows. So this is a descriptor of Matuta. It's like miken ni shiwa o yoseta Matuta. Matuta, who had wrinkles forming before her eyebrows. And then there's a ni. Taria no haha wa ita, so to Matuta, whose eyebrow was wrinkling with, whose brows were wrinkled, Taria's mother said, comma, line of dialogue is going to follow. So, Patron A translated this as, Lord Tenko is angry? Why? Matuta's brow furrowed in confusion. I like that. So note how, again, since this tag is sort of like talking about both women, Patron A just left off the whole Taria no haha wa itta because it's kind of gonna confuse this tag. We're only really talking about Matuta right now with her furrowed brow. Yeah, furrowed brow is a pretty textbook translation of Miken ni shiwa o yoseta. It works. It's just like if you always translate it that way, it gets pretty old pretty fast. I like adding Y, like turning the small tsu into a Y. I think that totally works. Patron B. What? Lord Tenko's wrath? When did that? A wrinkle of concern formed between her brows. So Patron B was interpreting this as Matuta's saying something and then she's going to be interrupted. That's why there's an M dash right after when did that. I don't think that's what is happening. I don't think that she's interrupted. She can't believe what she's being told here. Her friend of 10 years said, I can't see you anymore, and Tenko's angry with you. And remember how the previous line, Patron B translated that as like drawing the wrath of Lord Tenko that crossed the line. Matuta says, what? Lord Tenko's wrath? When did that? Like, when did that happen? Again, she's not being interrupted. So, I mean, it's a choice, but, and like, I like it, reading it in English. It works for me. It's not quite the way the Japanese was, though. I think in the Japanese, Matuta is more just kind of like really just shocked and can't really talk. I've been there when I'm truly shocked when someone says, I don't want to date you anymore, or or like, I don't want to be your friend anymore. Like, often you're just kind of shocked and you can't really speak. You just kind of repeat things that the other person says and then you trail off. I think that's kind of what's happening here. Anyway, a wrinkle of concern formed between her brows. I don't know if it's concern, but it could be. It's not concern. It's a little vague in the Japanese. So Patron B made a choice and made it concern. And I'm sure Matuta is concerned, so it's not wrong. Small Sarah, he made Tenko-sama angry. Period. Taria's mother said this to Matuta, whose forehead was wrinkled. Okay, so Small Sarah thought that he made Tenko-sama angry was said by Taria's mother. And yeah, it's so easy to mess these things up. Tags are so confusing in Japanese. I hate them sometimes. But yeah, no. And also note that the punctuation is completely wrong. Again, I think Small Sarah messed up the punctuation a lot because Japanese keyboards are kind of weird. And she had a hard time like finding where question marks and exclamation points and things were sometimes. But yeah, no. Matuta said he made Tenko-sama angry, and it's a question with a small tsu and an exclamation point. So she was like, oh, he made Tenko-sama angry? Yeah. Taria's mother said this to Matuta, whose forehead was wrinkled. Taria's mother said to Matuta, whose forehead was wrinkled, comma, followed by the next line of dialogue would work. But otherwise, this is just wrong. All right, next line of dialogue, speaking of which. こっそり儀式に出ていたんでしょ? アユルを連れて. Dialogue with lots of ellipses. うつむく女に向かって、相手はぼっそりと言った。でも、その様子じゃ、お告げは聞いていないみたいね。Alrighty, so who's saying what? Let's play a game. So the first line of dialogue is said by Taria's mother. The second line of dialogue with just the dots is said by Matuta. Third line of dialogue is said by Taria's mother. So then we have this tag. うつむく女に向かって、相手はぼっそりと言った。Who's the onna? Who's the aite? Who knows? Let's have fun guessing. Okay, so kossori is like in stealth, sneakily. Gishiki is the ritual, the ceremony. Lots of patrons and Small Sir were translating this many different ways. Basically, the Tenko summoning ceremony. Gishiki ni dette itan desho? You were at the ceremony, weren't you? Like in secret. Ayuru o tsurete. You took Ayuru with you. So this is one of those, like, Japanese sentences do this a lot, especially when you're asking a question. You'll be like, so, you did something or another, eh? And then you add another detail. But yeah, like, it sounds very natural in Japanese to, like, do something like that. Ask someone a question and then add, like, one more little detail after you've already asked the question. Like, arranged in a complete question, it would be more like, Ayuru o tsurete kossori gishiki ni dette itan desho? That's how you would actually like ask this as a complete proper sentence. That was my cat meowing. I don't know if you could hear that. He wants me to come to bed. But I have to finish recording this video. But the way it's phrased in Japanese, like it adds this very interesting nuance that often you have to just drop in English because it doesn't quite work all the time. Sometimes you can get it to work, but not always. But yeah, like in English it'd be like, you sneaked to the ceremony, didn't you? With Ayuru. See, it kind of doesn't work as well in English as it does in Japanese, but that's kind of the vibe. It's like, hey, I know you sneaked to the ceremony, and I know that Ayuru was with you too. It's like bum bum bum. So then the dots. Utsumuku is to hang your head. Onna ni mukatte aite wa bossori to ita. So the woman whose head was hanging, ni mukatte. So the aite turned towards the woman whose head was hanging, and bossori to ita, and whispered. Bossori again, it's like a sound effect again for like whispering something. Demo sono yosu ja, but judging by the way you look, otsuge wa kiite inai mitai ne. Otsuge, that's another thing that was translated differently by the patrons and by Small Sarah. The proclamation, the oracle, the prophecy, the holy word from Tenko, basically. But judging by the way you look right now, judging by that expression on your face, you didn't actually hear his oracle, did you? All right, that was a lot of words explaining this thing. Let's see how patrons translated it. You snuck out to the ritual, didn't you? You took him along. I think Ayuru instead of him would be better here, just because it's a little confusing otherwise. Matu just said nothing, staring at the floor. That works. Note, Patron A's been doing this a lot, and I like it. It's something I do a lot. Note how so many of these dialogue tags, like, the first half of the tag goes with the line that came before it, and the second half of the tag goes with the line that comes after it. But all of these tags are their own paragraph, if you like actually read Japanese light novels in Japanese. So that's why it can get kind of confusing. In English prose, you'd have like a line of dialogue followed immediately by the tag, and then a new paragraph, and then another line of dialogue by another character, followed by the tag immediately without paragraphs. So you wouldn't have like a line of dialogue, and then a paragraph break, and then a tag, along with another tag for a line of dialogue that hasn't even happened yet. But that's Japanese for you. But Patron A basically has just taken off that second half of the tag that would make it confusing. Just talking about Matuta here. And then changing just the quotation marks with ellipses just into a descriptive line. Matuta said nothing, staring at the floor. Often you can translate ... as character so-and-so said nothing. And that's a very valid translation of that. From the looks of it, you two didn't hear his divination, she whispered. I like that. And I like the capital H in his, because Tenko is a god to them. From the looks of it, I really like that as demo sono yosu ja. Yep, I dig it. Patron B, you snuck into the ceremony, didn't... Side note, I'm going to be pedantic. I think snuck isn't actually a word. I remember hearing that like 10 or 15 years ago, and like pedants were always like, oh, it's sneaked. You should never use snuck. I think snuck is fine, for the record, by the way. Some pedant might be like, snuck is not a word. Anyway, you snuck into the ceremony, didn't you? With Ayuru in tow. Ooh, I like that. See? Patron B is my bae. Patron B made it work. That structure that was in Japanese, where you had, the whole sentence should be, you sneaked Ayuru into the ceremony, didn't you? Like, that's how we would ask the question naturally in English. But by splitting it into two sentences like this, it's like, I'm going to drop a bombshell on you. I know that you sneaked into the ceremony. Now I'm going to drop a second bombshell on you with Ayuru in tow. Bum, bum, bum. But it reads well this way, the way Patron B split it up and worded it. In tow for tsurete. That's a perfectly valid way of translating that verb. Matuta, her face once again downturned, could say nothing in response. And I like how patrons A and B both translated onna as Matuta, because yes, onna is Matuta, and Aite is Taria's mother. And look, patron B moved that second half of the tag to the next line where it belongs. Taria's mother lowered her voice momentarily. Momentarily, interesting. That was not in the original Japanese, but it works. Don't know, like, I personally don't like the word momentarily in this context, because usually the only time I've ever heard momentarily used is like, the movie will begin momentarily. Please find your seats and sit down, or something. Like, usually momentarily is, in my experience, I've only ever really heard it used in like announcements in places, like the news will begin momentarily. I don't think it's wrong though. But then again, it seems you must not have heard the divine message. I like but then again. Demo. Sono yosuja. Yeah, it seems you must have not heard the divine message. I like from the looks of it. A hybrid would be nice, but then again, from the looks of it, you didn't hear his divine message. I like divine message for Otsuge. All right, small Sarah, let's see how you did. You went to the ceremony, didn't you, with Ayuru? See, this is an example of like, I did the same thing Patron B did. Well, small Sarah did the same thing that Patron B did, just not as well. With Ayuru in tow, with the ellipses, it just works better than just with Ayuru. Even though with Ayuru is a little more like the Japanese, I guess. With Ayuru in tow, it just kind of works better. You can kind of hear her actually saying this. You snuck into the ceremony, didn't you? With Ayuru in tow. Versus, you went to the ceremony, didn't you? With Ayuru. I don't know, it's kind of too final and like abrupt. Maybe it's just me. Facing the woman whose head was hanging. Daria's mother said, this is correct. This is a correct translation. This is a literal correct translation. And it is bad. It sounds so bad. Listen to how bad this sounds. Facing the woman whose head was hanging, Daria's mother said. Ah, good job, small Sarah. Good job doing a bad job. But in that condition, sono, it can be translated as that, but usually your works a lot better in this context. And condition is weird. From the looks of it, makes more sense. It doesn't seem like Ayuru heard the oracle. It's not just that Ayuru didn't hear the oracle. We already know Ayuru didn't hear it. He passed out. Matuta did not hear the oracle. We as a reader actually didn't know that Matuta hadn't heard the oracle. This is news to us as well. This is actually a pretty, cool, revealing sort of scene for the reader. Facing the woman whose head was hanging. Darius wrote this. Oh, that's amazing. I want a tattoo of that. All right, let's move on. Matuta wa hatto kao o ageta. Utsuge, Nishi-sama wa nanto mo sareta no desu ka? Can you tell it's late? Okay. My brain is giddy. All right, so hatto kao o ageta. Again, it's a sound effect-y thing. Hat is a sound effect of with a gasp, with a start, literally that, you gasping. Kao ageta, lifted her face, raised her head, looked up with a start or with a gasp or abruptly. Otsuge, the oracle, or however you want to translate that, the divine proclamation, the divine message. Nushi-sama, our Lord, nanto mo sareta, what did he say to us? And mosu is just a very honorable way of saying you say. Patron Hay translated that as Matuta's head shot up. That's a great translation for hatto kao ageta. What did he say? What divination did our Lord say? What divination did our Lord say? Sounds kind of weird. It's there was a list of divinations. Which one did he say? Yeah, that just sounds a little weird. What did he say? What did our Lord say? Would have been fine. Yeah, but what did he say? What divination did our Lord say? Sounds weird. It's not wrong, just sounds weird. Matuta, patron B. Matuta looked up suddenly, startled. You don't necessarily need both suddenly and startled. Matuta looked up suddenly, or Matuta looked up startled. I really like Matuta's head shot up. It really paints the picture that she's kind of shocked and what? Looked up suddenly, startled. It's a little too wordy, too, for what's going on. Usually, this is just a writer prosy sort of thing. If you're describing an action that doesn't take very much time, like somebody's head shooting up, you generally want to do that with as few words as possible. I'm terrible at this, by the way. I'm very wordy. So I often have to go back and delete things or combine words. And this is an instance where I think Matuta's head shot up works a lot better than Matuta looked up suddenly, startled. It paints a better picture. It puts you in there more viscerally. The dialogue. Message? Tell me, the Lord, what did he say? I like that for for tone. Like you can actually hear her kind of saying this. And I like that it's a little stilted in this case. I don't like the stiltedness of what divination did our Lord say, but I like the stiltedness of tell me, the Lord, what did he say? Because it's like correct stiltedness. It's more like she's kind of stumbling over her words because she's in so much shock over what's happening. I'm like, right, the divination, I missed it, the message, what did he say? I've been dying to know, but nobody would tell me because I'm an outcast in this village. Small Sarah. Matuta looked up abruptly. That's great. Abruptly is good for hatto. Did our Lord say something against Ayuru? That's a bit of a reach, small Sarah. She's not asking that. I mean, the implications are kind of there. The subtext is kind of there. But yeah, that's not what Matuta was saying. It's more like what was our Lord's message, really? Not did our Lord say anything against Ayuru? Next line of narration. 砂による相手から一歩身を引くと、少女の母は顔を歪めてこう言った。Alright, so 砂による is like to like cling on to somebody. Aite, so aite in this case is now describing Matuta, which is not at all confusing. So the subject of this sentence is shoujo no haha, the girl's mother. And again, the girl is Taria. Don't you love Japanese prose? Don't you love how uber specific everything is? So the subject of the sentence is shoujo no haha. So that would make aite Matuta. That's why aite in this case is Matuta. And in a former passage, aite was actually Taria's mother. Anyway. Sugari yoru aite, so Matuta who was clinging on to her, kara, so from Matuta who was clinging on to her, ippo mi o hiku, take a step back, pulled her body a step backwards away, basically. Shoujo no haha wa, Taria's mother, kao yugamete, kao yugameru is a very, very overly used descriptive phrase in Japanese prose. It means like your face distorts, twists, you get a look of scorn on your face, or you get a look of discomfort on your face. You can translate it a multitude of different ways, and you should, because again, it is a very cliche phrase that comes up a lot in Japanese prose. Koita, so spoke like this, said this, and this is what she said. So Taria's mother, a look of scorn on her face, took a step away from the woman who was like desperately clinging onto her and said this, basically. Patron A. Taking a step away from the woman clinging to her for an answer, Talia's mother recited the divination dramatically. The dramatically was not in the original Japanese, but she probably is reciting it dramatically, so it's not really a stretch. Yeah, and the recited the divination wasn't really in there either. Ko is like, it's doing a lot of heavy lifting here. It's like, this is how she said it, basically, was what it literally was in Japanese. But that sounds kind of weird in English. So recited the divination dramatically, or recited the divination is a pretty reasonable extrapolation. Taking a step away from the woman clinging to her for an answer. Yeah, I love and hate how Japanese, like, can modify a noun with so many words. You could handle this so many different ways. You could make this into separate sentences. Like, perhaps I today would have changed the sugari yoru aite. I might have moved that part of the tag up to the previous line. What did he say? What did our Lord say? Matuta demanded, clinging on to Taria's mother, period, new paragraph. Taria's mother took a step away from her, and with a look of scorn on her face, she said, comma, line of dialogue. Like, that's one way you could handle this. Again, like breaking up that tag and like putting the part that involves character A with character A's line of dialogue, and then putting the part of it that involves character B with character B's line of dialogue. Because otherwise you run into things like this where you have like taking a step away from the woman clinging to her for an answer. It's just so overly wordy in English, and it doesn't work so well. Like, it works in Japanese, but not so much in English. Hopefully that made sense, what I just said. Anyway, let's see what patron B did. Taria's mother shrank back a step. I like shrank. For ippo mio hiku. So when you combine the ippo mio hiku with kao yugamete, like, you know from those two descriptions that Taria's mother is kind of like, ugh, like, get away from me, you crazy woman clinging on to me, who has, yeah, like, so shrank does that. It paints that picture. Taria's mother shrank back a step from the desperate entreaty of the woman before her. Oh, yeah, that's great. That's how you handle it. Yeah, sungari yoru, you can just translate that as desperate. You don't have to be like clingy or the woman clinging on to her. It's desperate. That already paints a picture. You can see in your mind, like, her shrinking back and Matuta like clinging onto her desperately. And a look of contempt on her face for kao yugamete. Yeah, this is a great translation of this narration. I have absolutely no complaints. Small Sarah. Taking a step away from the imploring woman, Taria's mother said this with a twisted face. Yeah, twisted face is kind of literal for yugameru. It usually is better to attribute some kind of emotion when kao yugameru comes up in prose, instead of just being like twisted face. Unless like you feel like twisted face paints a good picture. Sometimes you can say like your face was screwed up with something. I've seen that in like older novels before. Like screwed up like you're gonna cry. But yeah, twisted face is weird. But the first part of it's fine, actually. It works okay. Taking a step away from the imploring woman. For sungari yoru, just imploring. Yeah, clinging to her for an answer is more literal from patron A. And you see how it's a little overly wordy, but changing clinging to her for an answer for just desperate entreaty and imploring, like, that cleans it up quite a bit and tightens it up. Twisted face. All right, what did she say with a twisted face? Line of dialogue. Nushi-sama wa kou itta wa... ... Konoba ni... I'll try to say this like Lord Tenko. Konoba ni kega... I can't do it. Konoba ni kegareta ibunshi ga iru. 一族の結束は崩れた。一族の危機は近い。と。Yep, my dramatic reading of Tenko and scene. All right, so this is what Tenko said. Tenko wa kou itta wa. It's odd that they kind of repeated that from the narration just before that. Kao yugamete kou itta. Nushi-sama wa kou itta wa. It's like, get on with it, lady. This is what Nushi-sama said. Konoba ni, in this place, in this spot. Kegareta, dirty, defiled, soiled, unclean, impure. Ibunshi ga iru. So an ibunshi is like an outsider. Ichizoku no kessoku wa kuzureta. So we mentioned kessoku in an earlier episode of this series. So like the unity of the clan has crumbled, kuzureta, has crumbled away, has dissolved, has been destroyed. Crumbled away is probably pretty good. Ichizoku no kiki wa chikai. So a crisis is near. Sounds weird. I'd say like an apocalypse or like a crisis is nigh. Crisis is not necessarily the best translation for Kiki in this case either. You'd want to use some very grand poetic, think back to your days in Sunday school, reading the King James Bible. This might not apply to some of you. But I have read the King James Bible, and yeah, like channel your inner King James Bible for this proclamation here, because this is a God saying it. But anyway, like, your unity has crumbled, and therefore, there's going to be a disaster, an apocalypse, a crisis. Yeah, crisis makes it sound kind of trivial. It's more like an apocalypse, in a way, like disaster, is nigh, or, approaching, it's near. To, so this to at the end is like, she's quoting him, basically. That's what that to is notating. All right, so patron A. Lord Tenko said this. There are dirty outsiders on our land, that our clan's unity has collapsed, and that a crisis will soon befall us. So, Patron A went with a direct quote at the start. Lord Tenko said this, and now this is kind of like a direct quote, and I quote, "There are dirty outsiders on our land, that our clan's unity has collapsed, and that a crisis will soon befall us." Like, can you imagine Lord Tenko saying, "There are dirty outsiders on our land, that our clan's unity has collapsed"? So, see what I mean? The first part of the quote was a direct quote, and the rest of it is a paraphrase. So you have to kind of decide which one you're going to go with. Are you going to go with a direct quote, or are you going to go with a paraphrasing? I think a direct quote maybe has more impact, and in the Japanese, it was a direct quote. So you know, at least make up your mind. Tenko said that there are dirty outsiders on our land, that our clan's unity has collapsed, and that a crisis will soon befall us. That works if you make the whole thing a paraphrase. Or if you make the whole thing a direct quote. Lord Tenko said this, "There are dirty outsiders on our land. Our clan's unity has collapsed, and a crisis will soon befall us." Like, that works a lot better. So just make up your mind if it's going to be a direct quote or a paraphrase. Crisis will soon befall us. I like the soon befall us. That's good. And again, crisis, I don't know if that works super well in this context. Maybe it's just me. Collapse for kuzureta. That's a good translation of kuzureta as well. Patron B, these were his words. And Patron B is using a direct quote here with the single quote. "An impure outsider is in our midst." Konoba, in our midst. Yes, that's very good. On our land for konoba, like, it's neither of those are wrong. Note how different they are. On our land versus in our midst. Konoba. Konoba, I think what Tenko meant probably with konoba is like right here, right now at the lake at this summoning ceremony. And pretty much the entire clan is there. Like, all the boys and girls who are of age and all of the adults of the clan pretty much are there. I think that's like technically officially what Tenko meant by konoba. I really like in our midst. My bond with the clan has been broken. I don't know if that's quite right. It's more that the unity of the clan, or the bond of the clan, has broken. Not necessarily my bond with the clan has been broken. The moment that will determine the continued existence of the clan is nigh. That's quite wordy. I appreciate. I think this was an attempt to not translate Kiki as crisis, because I don't think crisis is a good translation of Kiki in this context. Let me real quick Japanese Google Kiki and see what else they say it means. Yeah, crisis is like the textbook dictionary translation. Conjuncture, interesting. Peril! Yes, peril would be a good one. Yeah, pinch exigency? I don't even know what that word is. Emergency, crisis, danger, endangerment, hazard, risk, jeopardy. I like peril. I think peril would have been a really good word to use if you could work that in. Yeah, the moment that will determine the continued existence of this clan is nigh. Again, I appreciate the attempt to not translate Kiki as crisis, which I think that's what this was. But it winds up just sounding a little too wordy. I like the is nigh, though. Is nigh is the best choice for Chikai, if you're a god. And I also like the decision to make a direct quote here and show it with the single quote. All right, small Sarah. Our Lord said this, single quote, "There is a dirty child among you." Dirty. Impure would be a lot better, or unclean. Dirty is kind of weird. "Your unity has collapsed." That works. "He also said that our people would face a crisis soon." All right, so small Sarah kind of did the same thing that Patron A did, where like she couldn't make up her mind if it was all going to be a direct quote or if it was going to be like paraphrasing, and she went with both, and it's kind of it weakens it. It's supposed to build up to like, and what's more, like, your people would face a crisis soon, which again, crisis is just not a great translation for Kiki in this context. Peril or doom. Doom would be a good one too, actually. Yeah. Nice try, small Sarah, but no cigar. That's fine. I don't like cigars anyway. All right, that's the end of this episode of Let's Translate Light Novels. My apologies for how weird I was in this episode. Again, it's kind of late. We just had daylight savings time and I still have jet lag. So my brain thinks that it's 9 o'clock and my brain doesn't do smart things very well after 8 p.m. Anyway, outro stuff. I'll let future Sarah do that. And at this point, I'd like to thank my patrons, both the patrons who participated in the translations of this video and the patrons who contributed financially. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Greg, Lay, Henry Rooming, and DataFox. See you next time!